Absolutely, they're going to pivot to jobs.
They thought that they could pivot onto the economy.
President Obama would make a hard pivot.
Hard pivot to fixing the economy.
The president tried to pivot from the cost of war to rebuilding the economy.
Which was a very awkward pivot.
Questioning, wondering whether or not President Obama can pivot.
We now have to pivot and focus on jobs and growth.
Now that the pivot has arrived, joining me to discuss it, our Powerhouse Roundtable with George Will, economist Paul Krugman, political strategist Matthew Dowd, and Donna Brazil. So, it's happened, and President Obama has named Jeffrey Immelt as head of a new council on jobs and competitiveness. Impressed?
With the Immelt appointment?
With the whole pivot and the appointment particularly, in fact.
Yes, it's paid off in the following number. The percentage of the American population that identifies the president as a liberal has declined 10 points in 2 months. That's astonishing. And it's a response to his big political problem that was revealed in 2010 elections. That is, Democrats have been losing blue-collar white voters since the 1960s. That's white voters with no college education, basically. In 2010, he lost them 2-1, and there was no gender gap, men and women alike. A record loss, and this is the way to get them back.
You're seeing red, frankly, aren't you, Paul, over this?
Not exactly. It's kind of sad. I mean, the whole competitiveness thing is a bad metaphor.
Why?
Because
America is all about competition.
No, it isn't. The country is not a corporation. You know, a CEO who manages to lay off a large part of his workforce and increase profits is a success. Well, America has managed to lay off a large part of its workforce, and profits are hitting new records, and that is not a success. So these are not similar. The idea that we are reassuring blue-collar workers by appointing to a, not very important, but still a symbolic government post, the CEO of a company which has most of its workers outside the United States, earns most of its profits outside the United States, and is now, these days, more of a financial firm than it is a manufacturing firm in reality, was a major recipient of bailout funds. It's now, all of this may be a way for Obama to find a more business-friendly way to sell more public investment, which is a good thing.
But is it more than just symbolism and looking business-friendly? I mean, Immelt, in a interview with the FT before he was named, talked specifically about manufacturing, how you just couldn't rely on the services industry to continue this bubble and burst sort of economy, that you really needed to make things in order to be competitive and to create jobs.
Presidencies primarily are about perceptions of the American public and what you do with those perceptions and communications-wise. This president, I think, has probably had the best 45 days of his presidency, his entire presidency. This is the only time in his presidency where he's actually been on the rise. Every other part from Inauguration Day, he was falling. He's on the rise. He's done a number of things that I think have told the business community and the economic community and people that make jobs he's going to be consistent, which he did with the tax cuts and signing a thing that extended them, and he's going to provide confidence. And I think whether you like Immelt or not, or whether you like Bill Daley or not as chief of staff, it did send a message to the business community that I'm going to give some level of confidence on the economy. And what you do today, he's done all the regulatory stuff, he's done all the policy stuff. It hasn't really moved the economy. What the country needs now is a sense of confidence that he's willing to do that, and I think that's what he's done.
But the economy has shown some improvements, and I think what the president can do on Tuesday is to take us beyond the crisis that he inherited. We've heard for 2 years that the economy was going off the cliff. Now we have an opportunity, the president has an opportunity to talk about the road to revival, to rebuilding America's infrastructure. It will take private investment as well as some more public investments, I believe. But this is a great opportunity to show that he can bring divergent opinions together, people who might have different beliefs and different backgrounds, but he has one single goal, and that is to create jobs for the American people.
Donna, now you say the economy is improving, and it is, and that's what's depressing. That is, the recovery began 20 months ago, in June 2009, and unemployment seems extremely resistant to this.
But isn't this a moment where they're trying to actually kickstart it from emergency rescue of the economy to putting a dent?
I think that's all symbolism. I mean, the reality is that the strategy is to hope that the natural forces of recovery finally start to kick in on the job market as well as on industrial production and profits, which has been happening for a while, and then to try and get some longer-term things that will help the economy. There really isn't a job strategy here at all.
Well, I don't think we can underestimate the power and the need of a president to focus and to resonate on symbols. Symbols are important. It's what he talked about big time in Tucson. It wasn't just about here's what I want to do or this is what happened, this tragedy that happens. It was symbolic. It was American values. And I think today we've lowered the tax rates as far as they probably can be lowered. He's put as much money as he can, and though Paul would like him to put much more money, I think that he can reasonably with the deficit in order. And now it's time to focus on the symbols and the confidence in the American public.
But beyond symbols, aren't American corporations sitting on something like $2 trillion of cash? Doesn't he need to coax that out of them, and won't that create hiring?
They're sitting on no more cash than you would expect them to, given weak demand. I mean, consumers aren't spending. Corporations are not saying, if you actually look at what they really say when you ask them about their prospects as opposed to when they're lobbying, they're not sitting on their cash because they're afraid of government regulations or because they're afraid of taxes. They're saying, why should I expand my plant when I can't even sell the capacity, that I've got right now? So it's not.
So what's
it's not
the solution then?
Well, the solution would have been a New Deal. It would have been a really big, or quantitative easing from the Fed, all these various things, or stuff turns up. And basically, the solution right now is we're waiting for this gradual, natural healing process to take place.
24 months ago, they thought there was going to be a New Deal. The assumption going in was that there had been a crisis of confidence in capitalism, that it would open the way for government to have much more latitude for activism. Turns out what happened was a crisis of confidence in government, which was in no small measure blamed for the recession. So that
no, that's right. I agree. That's how it played out. It's not clear. That doesn't mean it was right. That's how it played out.
But without that public investment, without stimulating the economy, more Americans would have been in poverty. More state and local governments would have had to lay off teachers and firefighters and policemen. So I think the president and the Democrats, who once controlled half that capital, they had the right priorities at the right time, but this is a different era, and the president has to show he has a plan to create jobs for the future.
What I think is interesting is the presidencies are founded on the idea that you have the power and the ability to communicate to the vast majority of the American public. When your numbers drop, you no longer have that power, and you no longer have the ability to fashion policy when you don't. This president, I think, has finally learned that he is not going to be judged on a number of liberal or progressive legislative accomplishments, which he had a ton, more than any president in recent memory. He had health care, he had a number of things on investment packages, he had all that, and his numbers didn't move, they actually fell. Until he shifted, elections have consequences, and he shifted to a set of policies that was more in tune with where the American public was. His numbers have risen. Now he has the power of the pulpit again.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the model is something like Clinton, who, in fact, mostly was just riding on a successful economy, which was successful mostly for reasons that had nothing much to do with him, but he was able to be a very popular president by presiding over that, by providing competent management on those things he could control. I think that is Obama's model now. I'm not sure it'll be enough, because we're in much deeper economic trouble than we were in the 90s, but given the realistic political limits, you can't expect him to do too much.
Mm-hmm. We talk about symbolism, what the president needs to do politically. He's moved to the center. He's heeded the call of the people, so to speak. But when it comes to real solutions, how do you kickstart and how do you make a dent in that 9.4 figure?
You don't. I had lunch this week with Austin Goolsbee, who was your guest a few weeks ago, and he said, look, people seem to feel that in the basement of the White House somewhere there's an enormous switch. And you go down and throw it and jobs are created. The fact is the terrible frustration in the White House must be that everything that really matters is beyond their control, which is how to create jobs. It's not going to happen because of the government.